Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Western Perspective. I'm Taylor Hanna. Tonight we feature our conclusion of the Climate Interview Series, Part 3. We have explored political resistance, discussed emerging renewable technologies, the economics behind upgrading existing infrastructure, and what solutions we have for our future. This week I sat down with Greens MLC and climate change spokesperson Tim Clifford, who is pushing for acknowledgement of the climate crisis in our state parliament. What do you think of the current climate emergency?
Well, I'm hoping that it becomes an emergency in the eyes of the government. I think it's good that there are other jurisdictions in the world that are moving towards acknowledging that there's an emergency because of the climate crisis. We see all the events that are going on across the world. The Amazon's on fire. We've seen glaciers melting into the ocean, and even in our own state, drought and erosion. And also, like, there's stories of economically how it's going to damage us and the indirect costs of not acting. So for me, I'm quite concerned that there isn't any form of an emergency declaration in WA, because if we do have an emergency declaration, then we can get around a table and acknowledge the threat through that emergency and then start to talk about how we can do something about it.
So do you think there's definitely been a lack of conversations around this issue?
Yeah, definitely. Since I've been elected, we've been pushing really hard to try and get it on the agenda, because it doesn't matter which political affiliation or who you support. I've had people speak to me who support other parties or from all different backgrounds and are saying that we need to do something about it because it's going to affect us. And we do have a responsibility in this state because we are responsible for a lot of the emissions, and so we need to think about our own role globally, and we also need to talk about how best we can protect the people of WA.
Do you think it's sort of easy to be involved in, say, the climate change fight when you can just share a post on social media and go, yeah, that's me, done for the day, and then that's sort of all the action they would take? Well,
there are people that do that, and that's the way that social media works. If you like something, you feel it's good, okay, I like that someone else is raising this issue. But what we're seeing in the climate movement is that there are people that are actually going, okay, I don't want to be the person that sort of just shares petitions that can be really valuable and they're great because it acknowledges an issue. But people are actually saying, no, actually, I'm going to take part in a climate strike, or I'm going to take part in visiting my MP, and I'm going to take part in knowing what's being actively engaged and what's going on in sort of the conversation about why isn't our government doing something. And I think that's really important, because it's actually people are getting more and more frustrated, and that's causing more and more people from across the whole community to do something and become more active, whether it's in a group that might be trying to lobby the politicians to do something about it, or whether it's in just another space where you're trying to be more proactive in your own local community. It might be tree planting or whatever else. So it's good. People are becoming more active because of the issue.
More of a younger generation issue. Mm-hmm. Do you think that, say, the older generations are disengaged despite being blamed for causing it?
Well, I think it'd be a mistake for us to blame generations. We have to acknowledge that there's also there is a certain generation that okay, we went through this industrial age and then we went through a whole period of time where we're burning fossil fuels and all these kinds of things. But then in the background, you've got a layer of misinformation that was shared through a lot of different companies that weren't doing the right thing. They didn't have a social contract. They didn't see themselves as having a social contract. So what they did is they lobbied politicians hard. They spent a lot of money in advertising to try and make sure that no one did anything about the issue, which is the burning of fossil fuels. So you can't necessarily turn around and say, okay, we're absolutely going to blame a certain group of people for this. You can point to the corporations and everything like that. But I think what we need to do is we need to bridge a divide in the community, and everyone needs to start working together, which I think that's happening. I just wish that the government and the opposition would be in that same boat and start listening to the community.
What do you think of climate deniers?
Well, some people are going to deny climate change is real no matter what you say to them. There are a lot of conspiracy theorists and whatever else. But more recently there are a lot of people that are coming in saying, look, I was really sceptical, but now I'm actually seeing what's going on, and I think it's an issue that needs to be addressed. So it's not about so much about personal opinions about if they deny it or not. I think it's more about just go, okay, we'll give you, these are the facts, and we're just going to go with that. I'm more interested in trying to make sure that people understand that it is a real issue that we need to deal with, and that we can bring a lot of people on board to try and make sure that our elected officials do what they're supposed to do and to protect the community.
What do you think the next step is in addressing climate change? Do you think we sort of won't have a resolution unless the government and opposition do start to work together?
Well, I think no matter what, if the government, it would be a mistake for the government and the opposition to ignore the calls from the community to do something about it, because as you've seen across the world, the movement's getting bigger and bigger, and it's not going to stop. We've got climate strikes coming up. We've got different organisations, businesses and different parts of the economy calling on mechanisms to ensure that we can, we can take advantage of new technologies in renewable energy, new industries to make sure that people can get jobs in those things. But the other thing is there's insurance companies and everything talking about, we can't insure certain places because of just the climate risk. So I think it's just going to, I think that in that sense it's going to keep on getting bigger, so they just won't be able to ignore it.
Do you think it quite hasn't reached that point yet? What sort of out of 10, where are we at?
Well, it's hard to put a number on it, but all I can say is that us putting forward calling on the government to acknowledge this climate crisis and declare an emergency it's that they're acknowledging a threat, which it clearly is the threat, and if you can get past that first step, it's only a very small step in the whole scheme of things, but if you get past that, then we can get around a table and we can talk about what the solutions are, and also we can have a good look at our own industries and what role they play in the global climate crisis.
And how do you view Australia's contributions to the climate crisis? So we're not meeting the Paris Agreement, those sorts of things.
Well, we're in this time where we've got, I think Australia accounts for 1.4% of global emissions. And a lot of people say, oh, well, that's nothing, you know. But I think more recently with the New Zealand Prime Minister, when she said that if we all took that position, then nothing would get done. Nothing would be addressed. But on the other side of things, we need to talk about what we are accountable for in regards to exported emissions. If we're sitting at, I think, roughly around 5% of global emissions, which is huge considering the size that I think Australia make up is 0.003% of the world's population, yet which we account for 5% of the global emissions exported, inclusive of domestic, and that might be projected to be 17% by 2030. I think we have a huge role to play and a responsibility, and we saw more recently in the Pacific Forum how the Prime Minister and the Deputy PM pretty much insulted those nations, because these nations are facing a crisis in a sense of they won't have a home in the future, and we play a direct role in that, exporting coal, exporting gas, and if we support those industries, we're playing a direct role in what's going on, not only in the Pacific, but the Amazon and other parts of the world. So we do have a big responsibility, and we need to acknowledge that, and we need to work out how we're going to do something about it. Do
you think it sort of has like a big flow-on effect if we don't address it?
I think I talked about other jurisdictions declaring climate emergencies and acting to address the issue of climate change. We're going to be left behind in a lot of ways, because Australia, we're going to take advantage of our natural resources. We've got the best sun in the world. We can take advantage of wave, wind. We could be leaders in the world in regards to renewable energy technologies, and we don't want to be in a situation where we're going to be this state and country with stranded fossil fuel assets because of other countries acting to literally say, okay, we're going to put a ban on importing gas or coal because of what it's doing to the climate and how it's affecting other countries. So if we can't put our lot in with these industries and expect that we're going to have a good outcome in the future, because the climate issue isn't going to go away.
Do you think that Australia needs a greater transition towards renewable energies?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at what's happened before with the Liberal government repealing all the carbon package, or majority of it, it really affected the way that we could have taken advantage of that. We would have been reducing our emissions, as well as like encouraging industries to work within Australia, which would have employed local people to get it involved in an industry that's only going to grow. We would be in a place where we would have a lot more renewable energy, not only in WA but across the country, and we would be looking at retiring our coal-fired power stations, which are coming to end of life anyway. So we would be ahead of the game. We would be transitioning communities into different industries, and we'd be working with them. Right now, we've got different parts of the political landscape working against each other, staking their mast on coal is going to be here forever, and we've got other parts of them going. Fracking is going to be something that we need to do, but what we need to do is we need to make sure that we take fossil fuel money out of politics, so they can't donate to any of the parties, so they're not influenced by them. And we need to look at where the world's going, and that's with renewable energy. So we need to take advantage of that.
What are the Greens doing about it? I know you want to push to the government to declare it a climate emergency, and then what?
Well, first of all, as I said, it's a small step. We get this climate emergency through, I hope that we can get it through. And then what we can do is we can start talking about what mechanisms we can put and what policies we can put in place to address the issue. I'd like to see a renewable energy target, 100% renewable. For WA, I'd love to see us with a net zero emissions target, so we can have a date that we can work towards to make sure that we can take into account not only domestic but exported emissions, so we can transition away from fossil fuels, get out of it as quickly as possible. And also, I want to see us be able to work with the community. My view is that I've got a duty of care to the community. I was elected. I represent people in the community, everyone, and I want to make sure that the other elected officials know that they have that duty of care too. So there's a huge anxiety in the community, and I understand why. And I think it's up to us to make sure that we work with them to get the best possible outcome for the community.
Do you believe that we can reduce our emissions significantly enough to make a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, you talked before about social media, and I acknowledge there's so many bad stories, and it's hard not to take that and carry that yourself. But I also see there is hope in this, is because there are a lot of people in the community doing great things to try and make sure that we can transition away from fossil fuels, and try and make sure that elected officials are following through with their duty of care and protecting the community through putting forward policies. And I do have a lot of hope that we can keep building this community movement to make sure that the government knows that this issue isn't going to go away, and the community has a high expectation that they're going to put policies in place to protect us all. Renewable energy is here to stay, and it's only going to get bigger. And our social responsibility in addressing emissions is another thing that the community they expect us to talk about. We don't want to see our Pacific Island neighbours go under the ocean. It's horrific to think of that happening, and we should be doing everything in our power to stop that from happening, and also acknowledge that we do play a role in what's going on globally in regards to the negative effects of climate change, and I believe we can do something about it.
And that's all we have time for this week. We hope you've enjoyed the Climate Interview series. Don't forget to join us next week for another episode of Western Perspective. Until then, Ivan and Danny, back to you.
Thanks, Taylor. This week's main news again. Concerns remain about the environment if a potential port in Kwinana goes ahead, with environment advocates warning consequences for future generations. They claim potential port plans have been poorly investigated by Westport, calling the project a sham.
And that's our weekly news and current affairs. We have the latest on our website and Facebook page.
Until next Sunday after 8, thanks for watching, thanks for calling in. Good evening.
See you next week.